This is Saturn Girl. Like this video, subscribe to my channel, comment below because I want to know what you think and it helps me out with the algorithm. Also click the bell when you subscribe so that you get notified when my new videos drop. And my videos are the best. Well, anyway, this is another special edition of my transit videos. What's going on now? Well, on December the 6th, Neptune, our denizen of the depths of deception and despair, will station direct after being retrograde for nearly 6 months since June the 30th. Let's take a look at the chart, shall we? Okay, there's Neptune. You see, he's retrograde, and he's slowing down, stationing, and then stations direct. Oh my goodness. Well, you see, Neptune spends about half the year retrograde. So this is something I tend to look at with regards to current and historical events rather than individuals. When we analyze events around the Neptune retrograde cycle, we see a recurring theme of deception and revelation. You see, while Neptune is retrograde, we'll often see efforts to obfuscate or distort truth, facts, reality, typically for some sort of selfish gain, right? Then, when Neptune stations direct, those deceptions are often exposed. We see examples of this in history, but especially over the past few years, with the proliferation of conspiracy theories online, right? But before we get into that, let's talk a little bit about what retrogrades are and what they even mean. So, what are they astronomically? Well, retrograde motion is when a planet appears to move backwards through the zodiac as seen from Earth. And we know the planets don't move backwards. They all orbit the sun in the same direction, but at different speeds. You see, Neptune is what we call a superior planet, meaning that it's further from the sun than Earth. As Earth approaches a conjunction with the superior planet, it will appear to slow down, stop, and move backwards, as seen from Earth upon the backdrop of the constellations or the fixed stars, yes? And then, as the Earth overtakes Neptune, then he will appear to station direct and move in the proper way once again. You see, superior planets typically go retrograde as they approach a trine with the sun, and then go direct again when they leave a trine with the sun on the opposite side or the opposite direction. So what do retrogrades mean in astrology? Well, like we said, the planet appears to slow down, to stop, and move backwards, right? So we see primary significations of retrogrades being things like delays, right? That is, outcomes and consequences are slow to emerge. Reversals, right? Good things can get worse and bad things can get better. An unfinished business, that is, tying up loose ends, right? From something that was left hanging. Now, what about Neptune? What does Neptune mean in astrology? Well, Neptune in the Greek pantheon was Poseidon, yes? The god of the ocean, storms, earthquakes, and apparently even horses. He was associated with water in general, and it's from the association with water and the modern connection to the zodiacal sign Pisces that Neptune has also come to rule the tides of emotions, fear, and deception. You see, I practice more traditional astrology, so to me, Neptune doesn't really rule anything, but we do see some of his significations imported from the sign Pisces, which modern astrologers assigned him rulership over, but that's a whole nother topic. You see, in esoteric astrology, which was my primary background, Neptune has to do with what is termed the astral plane. You see, this is the emotional or watery plane. where imagination dominates. In its finer expressions, we see spiritual aspiration and idealism, right? And we see these expressed through the creative imagination, which is the highest astral or emotional faculty in this context. And we manifest these sort of lofty ideals through what? Typically it's art, music, literature, poetry, and mysticism. Neptune is the planet of vision. And like St. Paul said, where there is no vision, the people perish. The astral plane is also the realm of mists, fogs, and miasmas, desire, and attachment. When we are attached to a desire, we see the rest of the world through that lens, don't we? And in that way, Neptune has come to represent the deception and the fantasy that is so often connected to the astral plane in esoteric literature, right? We see, right? We see only those things that we want to see, to the exclusion of the things we need to see, yes? From these associations with desire and fantasy, Neptune is further symbolic of intoxication, avoiding responsibility, hallucinations, fanaticism, mental illness, and even psychic phenomena. When Neptune goes retrograde, we'll often see misplaced hysteria and fears overwhelm the public psyche. It's sort of like being drunk and irrational. And then when Neptune goes direct, it's like the hangover, isn't it? And we suddenly have to face the consequences of our silliness. Yes? And we have several examples to look at here. So the first one I want to look at, well, 2001. And so that's September 11th, right? On September 11th, 2001, Al-Qaeda carried out a terrorist attack against the United States by flying commercial airliners into the two towers of the World Trade Center and the Pentagon. A fourth plane went down before it could reach any other target. Now, of course, Neptune was retrograde at this time. This was a terrible tragedy, over 3,000 lives lost. But it also became the justification for destructive foreign policy decisions for the subsequent 20 years, right? 9/11 was used as the pretext for the war in Afghanistan, which became a free-for-all for defense contractors to siphon off mass amounts of money from the federal government. Well, it was also used to justify the invasion of Iraq. You may remember all the hype about Saddam Hussein's weapons of mass destruction that weren't really there. We never found them. He never used them. Well, 9/11 also became fodder for conspiracy theories, didn't it? There were, of course, legitimate questions about what led to the attacks, especially in terms of military and economic policies that fomented radicalization. But rather than ask legitimate questions that are difficult to answer and require systemic addressing, fringe media figures like Alex Jones pushed the narrative that 9/11 was a government conspiracy. You may have seen all those popular shirts and stickers that said 9/11 was an inside job, right? Ironically enough, though, Neptune would also be retrograde when the 9/11 Commission report was released in 2004. Now, the report didn't address some important connections between intelligence and law enforcement and some of those people that were involved in the attack. And instead, they said that we didn't have enough communication between law enforcement and intelligence, which really just added to popular suspicion. So again, this retrograde sort of thing that persisted. Well, and with regards to 2004, We also saw Neptune's influence in the run-up to the 2004 presidential election. That's when George W. Bush ran against John Kerry. Not only were fears of terrorism used to prop up the Bush campaign, but also really shameless and deceptive political tactics, masterminded by the infamous strategist Karl Rove, right? We had the swift boat Veterans for Bush, which dismissed any idea or notion of George W. Bush having gone AWOL during his Air National Guard service, which, that's sort of been shown, right? And instead, they attacked John Kerry for a distinguished military career. He received multiple medals, I think 3 Purple Hearts and a Silver Star or something like that. But Karl Rove had this great idea: attack people's strengths, not their weaknesses, right? Neptune was retrograde from May until the end of October leading up to the election. But the damage was already done. You see? Well, then in 2019, we had a slew of Neptunian hypes that took center stage, right? Throughout the fall and summer, we saw a few, or I guess the summer and fall, we saw a few wacky crazes take over. The first one was the Storm Area 51 nonsense. You see, just a few days after Neptune went retrograde that year, 2019, someone named Maddie Roberts made a satirical post about storming Area 51 to supposedly expose all the secrets that they had there. The actual event took place while Neptune was in retrograde as well. About 150 people showed up around September 20th or so, according to Wikipedia, right, at both entrances to Area 51, but no one actually made it in. It was a bunch of nonsense. Well, and then we also had the hype of the birds aren't real conspiracy, right, which was also satirical and got taken way too seriously. It was started by a young man named Peter McIndo. And again, he started it as satire in order to make fun of Trump supporters who, started believing it. The gist of the theory was that the United States government systematically exterminated all the birds between 1959 and 1971, replacing them with surveillance drones. Okay. Well, McIndo started this whole thing in 2017, again, while Neptune was direct, but he openly stated that it was a joke and it was satire at the time, according to Wikipedia. But it gained the most traction in the summer and fall of 2019 when it went viral online. I had friends repeating this sort of stuff. Again, while Neptune was retrograde. A billboard was even put up in Memphis, Tennessee around that time with the popular slogan, "Birds aren't real." Well, I mean, I've been eating chicken this whole time and I haven't seen any gears or wires or anything, so it sounds a little silly to me. We also saw the mainstream dissemination of the QAnon conspiracies with the publishing of the book QAnon, An Invitation to the Great Awakening. And they call me woke. On November the 5th was when it was published, of 2019. Remember the 5th of the... I wonder if they did that on purpose. Anyway, again, while Neptune was retrograde. You see, the book detailed the so-called plan to save the world from awful people. And it was advancing various conspiracy theories that the authors claimed were based on secret military clearance. None of the claims from the book ever materialized, and many Q followers dropped the whole thing once Neptune went direct later in 2020. And that brings us to 2020, one of the most pivotal Neptunian moments in recent history. It was one of the biggest hypes we saw in recent years, right? Neptune was retrograde from June 23rd of 2020 until November the 29th. So we saw this during the lead up to the 2020 election with the explosion of the Stop the Steal movement. The idea was that basically if Trump lost the 2020 election, then it was stolen from him by awful democratic conspiracies, right? This whole thing was first started, though, by the right-wing strategist Roger Stone in 2016. And then it was blown further out of proportion by the whole QAnon Great Awakening theory, right? That Donald Trump would come back to power and expose all the awful things and fix them, right? Well, Neptune went direct just a little bit after the election in late November. And the dust began to settle, and it was clear that Joe Biden was the winner, even though there was all sorts of hoopla and contesting in court cases, right? Then we hit the crescendo of all this. When? On January 6th, 2021, when the movement itself was basically exposed, right? And never really materialized. And it just became a whole messy event, which we know January 6th was. And after that, when this awakening didn't manifest, a lot of Q supporters fell away. But we still see the same stuff being spouted online, and we hear it at rallies and all kinds of wackiness, don't we? Well, last year, 2022, may not have been as eventful by contrast, but we still had some interesting Neptunian events. Number one, the fitness guru Brian Johnson, also known as the Liver King, right, launched his online persona while Neptune was retrograde. Yes. He claims that he kept his amazing physique by eating liver, among other organs, right? A lot of nutritionists that I saw warned that this wasn't a safe diet. Well, and around the time Neptune was in its shadow period about to turn direct, the Liver King admitted to being on steroids. Once Neptune was fully direct, he had a brief apology tour and then sort of fell back into obscurity. Well, also during that time, Biden announced an increase of funding for the staffing of the IRS, the Internal Revenue Service, who collects taxes. Now this was turned into another conspiracy theory, that Biden was creating a shadow army of Antifa super soldiers. I'm like, have you seen any of those kids? I mean, they don't look like super soldiers. So. No disrespect to them, but you know. Meanwhile, what was it really? It was just more civil servants who couldn't leave their desks. Also, while Neptune was retrograde, Alex Jones, once again, was found liable for damages that parents of deceased children from the Sandy Hook massacre experienced as a result of him telling his followers that the whole Sandy Hook massacre was a staged event and that all the victims were just crisis actors. Well, a lot of those parents experienced extreme harassment from Jones followers, and one of them even took their own life. Well, what about this year? 2023, right? Well, while Neptune was retrograde this year, starting June 30th, and it's about to go direct now, we saw the Republican Speaker of the House, Kevin McCarthy, open up an impeachment inquiry into Joe Biden without any evidence, right? And they still don't have any evidence, yes? So it's a very Neptune retrograde thing, right? And with Neptune direct in the coming months, this could likely be exposed as merely political maneuvering. Well, also around the same time, McCarthy was removed from the speakership, and even further right Congressman Mike Johnson was installed. And guess what? He's also committed to keeping the investigation going, right? So, well, and then we saw multiple assault allegations against actor and podcaster Russell Brand. He, of course, doubled down, saying that it was a deep state conspiracy against him for merely speaking the truth. Right? I can't do his accent, but you know what I'm saying. But law enforcement in the UK is taking the allegations quite seriously, and they are conducting their own investigation. And I bet we'll see more coming from this as Neptune is direct. And then, elephant in the room, October the 7th. Hamas attacked Israel. It was a disgusting slaughter, of course. But then the reaction has been 15,500 dead Gazans? I think that's the current toll, 15,500. And nearly 7,000 of those are children. My goodness. Well, late last month, late November, the New York Times just reported that Israel apparently had foreknowledge of the attacks about a year ahead of time. This is sort of a Neptune direct thing. And I'm guessing that more will come out about this and will be exposed as Neptune gets into direct mode. Well, so after reviewing events that correlate with the Neptune retrograde cycle, a pattern emerges, doesn't it? Things are unclear while Neptune is retrograde. Groups of people are more susceptible to being swayed, right, and to deception. Things become more clear when Neptune turns direct, but it's not always pleasant, is it? It's not pleasant to wake up with a hangover. Well, I hope that was informative. Please like, subscribe, and click the bell, and make sure to comment below. Watch my other videos too, because I have tons of educational content, and I'm pretty cute and funny. Yeah. I also do the best readings. It's science, yes? All my contact information is below. You can also visit me at my website, frankielynch.com, to book. And please also consider giving to my Patreon. Again, information is below. It helps me keep making this content. But most importantly, I love you. You're beautiful. And have a wonderful whatever it is you're having.